Hello, my name's Dave Foster, and many of you know me, and some of you that don't. You might need to look at my background, etc., etc. But I'm one of the few driving instructors or driver trainers, should I say, to have ever completed the master's degree in driver training education. Normally, I do written posts each week, or try to do one each week, etc. But today I thought I'd do something special. Today I thought I'd help out. Recently, with my own instructors, I run a driving school. I tend to do a once a month training session with them. Currently, it has been online. And I was looking at something which is a particular old favourite of mine, which I help, was about how the driving examiners mark. Because it seems something that during part 3 training, very few people cover, very few people actually look at. And judging by what I see on Facebook, etc., very few people seem to understand it. Very few people seem to understand exactly how the examiner marks, and often you see things said like, oh, that would be a serious fault in my driving test centre, or questions about, is that a serious driver fault, dangerous fault, etc. One of my pet hates is the use of the word minor faults. Maybe being a bit pedantic, but minor faults were officially got rid of back in 1997 when the new style of examining and marking came into force. Basically, driving instructors up and down the country didn't like the way that an examiner could choose themselves whether somebody would pass or fail. And it was quite possible for somebody to pass with 10 driver faults, 10 minor driving faults, and somebody else could fail who only had 3 minor driving faults. Because in the opinion of the examiner, that person was safe. And that changed into the system that we have now, where the number of driver faults are counted. And a driver fault is what it says, it's a fault in that person's driving. The serious fault is a fault that potentially could have been dangerous, and a dangerous fault is obviously dangerous, and etc. So if you consider it like that, a driver fault is potentially a serious fault is potentially a dangerous fault. And all driver faults, no matter what it is, can be classed in those categories. The exceptions, of course, are where driving pupils break the law. For example, if a speeding fault is committed, well, that can't be classed or shouldn't be classed as a driver fault, because of course it breaks the law, so it should automatically become a serious fault. Occasionally, pupils, like in real life, just exceed the speed limit for a few moments and pop it back down again. That would be considered, or could be considered, a driver fault. Now I'm going to run over to a PowerPoint presentation which I produced for my group, and I'll just share that with you now. So this was a presentation which I used for my driving instructor in my school. It was how the examiner marks. But what I did differently to what I've done over many years is relating it to the ADI check test form, what I've got up here, and the PDI one. So whether or not you're doing a check test, a standards check as it is now, or whether you're doing a part 3 test, of course, the rules still apply, but we should be applying them anyway in our general tuition. So let's have a look at a scenario. Now, in this case, I'm using a simple junction, a simple turn right, okay, crossing traffic. It could be anything. It could be a fault on a maneuver. It could be a fault with meeting traffic. It could be a fault at traffic lights, pedestrian crossings, any number of things. It could be a control fault. They're all basically covered exactly the same. So let's have a look at our scenario here. Here comes our car driving down the road, and it's about to turn right. Now, I haven't put indicators in and everything like that, signals, etc. We just assume they're done. But the point here is this car is about to turn right, and as they go, and as they turn right, they make a simple right corner cut. So they have actually cut the corner off there. Okay, so now question answer time here. I often ask people on a course, how would you mark that fault? And it will normally be met with a group of qualified and experienced ADIs with a mixture of things from driver fault to dangerous faults, and occasionally the fault with no consequence. Okay, well, let's ask a few questions first of all. Did it affect somebody? That's the first thing we're going to ask ourselves. Did it affect somebody, etc.? No, in this case, no, it didn't, because in this scenario, there is complete open ground to the right and the left of the junction. We can see all the way in the road. We can see there is nothing coming from anywhere, and we can see clearly it didn't affect anybody. So if it didn't affect anybody, it couldn't have been a dangerous fault. Could it have affected somebody? That's the next question. So, well, there's nobody around for it to affect. So it couldn't have affected anybody because there was nobody there. Didn't break the law, so therefore it can't be a serious fault. Did it have potential to affect somebody? Well, no, because there's nobody there. So here we're going to end up marking this as what we call a fault with no consequence. Now, these are the ones where examiners mark quite a few of these when they look at them. It's worth bearing in mind that when an examiner is trained, when an examiner has to put pen to paper or stylo to tablet, whatever they use now, etc., finger to iPad, they need to ask themselves that for each and every fault, if this was the only fault that I put down, would it be enough to fail them? Effectively, they're asking themselves, is this the 15th or 16th fault? Because it could be, later on you could accumulate another 15 driver faults, and this one with the others could result in a fail. So they ask it on each occasion one. Basically, each one is even though it may be a driver fault, they may be considering it to be like the 16th. So in this circumstance here, did it affect somebody? No. Could it have? No. Did it break a law? No. And did it have potential to affect anybody? No. Okay. So it was a fault with no consequence. Now let's take exactly the same scenario, except this time maybe on the corner our view is restricted. It could be a building in the way, or maybe it was bushes, trees, etc., but we've changed our scenario here slightly. What our driver is doing is going to be exactly the same. Also notice in this image there is a picture of a vehicle, although they're quite a way up the junction. So here comes our driver again doing exactly the same thing, but on this occasion you could say, well, hang on, they couldn't really see up into that road. So whilst they cut that corner again, exactly the same as before, let's ask our questions again. Let's come back to them. So did it affect anybody? No, the vehicle was too far away. Could it have affected somebody? Possibly, but they were quite far away, so it could have. Did it break the law? No. Did it have potential to affect somebody? Well, yeah, I think if that car came down a bit further, then it would have. So it's a driver fault. Okay. Potentially if that vehicle was a bit further. And this is where the examiner has to mark different ways, etc., this is where we often get the discrepancy between what actually happens. And one of the reasons why you can never really appeal a driving test, because it's impossible to absolutely replicate, absolutely copy the exact same scenario of where a car was. And the examiner is in the best seat of the vehicle. He's sitting in the passenger seat. He can see everything. He or she can make that decision. Now, we're going to do exactly the same thing here, exactly the same circumstances. The only difference it's going to be here is as our vehicle turns in, this vehicle is now a little bit further. And you can see here, this vehicle's a bit closer. Let's go and ask our questions again. Well, did it affect somebody? No, it didn't. It didn't actually affect them. Could it have? Well, yes, it could have here. If you were coming down the road and you were the pink car in this scenario, and you suddenly saw that car come around there, it's going to worry you. It didn't break the law. It's already affected somebody or could have affected somebody. So this one sort of trumped really it's affected somebody. So this is going to probably be marked as a serious fault. Again, you can see what potentially could have happened here as these two vehicles came together. Now you probably guessed the last one. Here we go. Again, exactly the same scenario. But on this occasion, this vehicle is much closer to the junction. And as this has happened here, you know, we've had this situation. Now, what's going to have happened here, again, is the examiner could have actually acted either verbally or physically. If the examiner has taken the wheel or slowed the vehicle or at some point had to say something, you need to stop, slow down, etc., automatically that has affected somebody. If the other vehicle has to, what I call one of the three S's, they've either had to slow, swerve, or they've sworn, then, you know, it's almost certainly going to be a dangerous fault. A dangerous fault is always one that makes you miss a heartbeat, the one that makes you think, oh my God, it really does affect you. Your pulse starts to race for a moment, etc. If you don't get that rush of adrenaline, that actual surge, then it wasn't dangerous. It was probably only serious. Many instructors say things, that was dangerous, when in reality it was serious. Dangerous is, it was an examiner that once said to me back in Exeter Test Centre, and she said, you always know when it's a dangerous fault because it's preceded by a rush of adrenaline. And she also backed it up with adrenaline is normally a sticky brown colour. She really was trying to emphasise the fact that you do know it was dangerous. It takes your breath away. It really makes you think, that was close. Okay, otherwise it's serious. And again, there's our rules, etc., etc. And as we've already done, it was a dangerous fault because it did affect somebody, so it trumps all the others. Now, how does this relate to the standards test? Well, mainly under risk assessment. One of the things in risk assessment says, did the trainer ensure the pupil fully understood how responsibility for the risk would be shared? Let's look at our first scenario here, where, you know, we decided it was no fault, etc. There was nobody around, etc. when this happened. But certainly some form of discussion needs to take place. What if there was a vehicle there? We're actually saying to your pupil, you know, you are taking responsibility for this. Would you have done this if there was a car there or if there was a building there? You're trying to get them to take on the responsibility. So again, certainly in terms of an exam, no fault, but you're certainly going to be wanting to have a discussion about it. Was there a better way they could do it? Was there a safer way? Would they have done something different in other circumstances? Also, we see were directions and instructions given in good pupil and clear time under the risk assessment again? Well, sometimes it's the instructor who's caused the fault. If an instructor gives late instruction and then the pupil makes a rush turn, then of course it could be the instructor that's caused the fault. So examiners, when marking for part 3 and for the standards check, are looking for that. Are instructions given in good and clear time to enable the pupil to have the thought process to take the responsibility to actually make decisions for themselves? Early in a pupil's lessons, you might give those instructions a little earlier, closer to the independence driving, the driving test, they may be given just a little bit later, etc. And of course, we have the self-guided route where people can follow sat-nav or route directions, but they would make the decisions themselves. Interesting one here was the trainer aware of the surroundings and the pupil's actions? This is one I see a huge amount. What often happens is the instructor is almost purely looking out the front window. They're only thinking of it from a driver's point of view. They're not watching what their learner's doing. They're not looking to see if their learner is looking up to see, for example, like we hear the pink cars introduced here. They're not really looking into the road, etc. Because the instructors are often pre-focused on looking at it from a driver's point of view. If ever you've done training with me, you will almost certainly have heard the classic look after your pupil by looking after your pupil. And in a junction, of course, we know what the pupil's going to be doing. We've told them at the end of the road or take the next road on the right. We know the first thing we're going to be looking for is the mirrors. So we look for the mirrors. We watch them for the mirrors. We watch them for the signal. We look out the road for the position and we can sense the speed. And then at that junction, of course, we've already taken our looks. At that point, then we're looking at our learner. Is the learner looking up the road at the vehicle, up instancing? Are they taking those effective observations? Are they looking at the cyclist, etc.? You know, if these things happen and nothing is mentioned, you're going to get a poor mark for your test under where you will read out the people's surroundings and the actions. Okay, so looking out for things. Was the verbal or physical intervention by the trainer timely and appropriate? Often, again, people don't look or don't speak before they create or the fault is creating. Often in situations where instructors, what we were explaining before, would often say, that was dangerous, when in reality it wasn't. It was just a serious. So giving the correct interpretation. And then finally in that session was sufficient feedback given to help the people understand any potential safety critical incidents. Did we talk through it enough? Was the information correct? Are we using information from the Highway Code, Driving Essential Skills, the key publications from the DVSA recommended? Often people will say to me things like, I'll give you an example, they'll say things like, oh yeah, you need to check your mirrors every 2 seconds. Okay, this will be an instructor on training. Another will say 3, another will say 4. I will often look up and say, oh, it's interesting. What's the Highway Code say? And that's normally met with a, I don't know. Does it say 3, 4, whatever? And of course, those of you that are familiar know that the Highway Code says that we should check our mirrors frequently. Well, then, of course, you can have a conversation with your pupil. What does frequently mean? Okay. Well, on a busy road, it might be more frequent than on a quiet road. On a motorway, it might be, you can have the discussions. And amazingly, your pupils will have that discussion with you. But potentially, you know, was it enough? Did we talk about it enough? Was the information correct? That is basically the end of that presentation. I don't want to take any time too much. I'm hoping that you're going to find this useful. On the website where you found this, there's lots of other stuff, lots of other resources, etc., all completely free, etc. You know, I run a driving school. That's how I earn my money. The driver training education is there for the benefit of you and for the benefit of other driving trainers and trainees to learn, and very often sharing my thoughts and helps. If you've enjoyed it, then you know where it is. DTE-Elite.co.uk, and I'll catch you again. Thank you very much. Bye bye.